Johnny Carson had hosted The Tonight Show for 30 years. 30 years of monologues, celebrity interviews, sketches that became cultural touchstones. He'd perfected the rhythm, the timing, the ability to keep a show moving no matter what happened. He'd interviewed legends and newcomers, politicians and performers. He'd made America laugh before bed for 3 decades. But nothing in those 30 years prepared him for what Lucille Ball was about to say. It was April 1989. Spring in New York. The Tonight Show was in its usual smooth operation. The monologue had landed well, the audience was warm, and Lucille Ball, comedy legend, television pioneer, the woman who'd invented the sitcom format, was scheduled as the guest. She hadn't been on television much lately. Health issues. Age. The industry had moved on to younger stars. But Johnny had personally called her. Asked her to come on. One more time. For old time's sake. Lucille arrived at 30 Rock that afternoon, moving slower than she used to. She was 77 years old. Still sharp. Still had that presence. But you could see it in her eyes. The weight of decades, the tiredness that comes from being a trailblazer who'd fought every step of the way. The crew treated her like royalty. Because she was. Without Lucille Ball, half of them wouldn't have jobs. She'd proven that television comedy could work. That women could run studios. That you could be funny and powerful at the same time. The show started. Johnny did his monologue. The audience laughed in all the right places. Then came the introduction. Johnny turned to the camera with genuine warmth in his voice. Not the performative warmth he used for most guests. Real affection. Our next guest needs no introduction. She's a legend. A pioneer. And someone I'm honored to call a friend. Please welcome Lucille Ball. The audience erupted. A standing ovation before she even appeared. Lucille walked out slowly, carefully, waving to the crowd. She was wearing an elegant suit. Hair perfect. Makeup perfect. Every inch the star she'd always been. But up close, Johnny could see how much effort it took. How much this appearance was costing her physically. They hugged. Longer than usual. When they separated, Johnny held her hand for an extra moment. Helped her into the guest chair. The audience was still applauding. Lucille soaked it in. Smiled that famous smile, blew kisses. Finally, the applause died down. Lucy, Johnny said, his voice warm. It's been too long. Well, Johnny, you know how it is. They stop calling when you stop being young and beautiful. She delivered the line with perfect timing. Self-deprecating but with an edge. The audience laughed. Johnny shook his head. You're still the most beautiful woman in television. Liar, she said, but she was smiling. But I appreciate a good liar. They fell into their rhythm. The easy banter of two people who'd known each other for decades. Who'd come up in the same era. Who understood what it took to survive in this business. Johnny asked about the old days. About I Love Lucy. About Desi. About the studio. Lucille answered with stories the audience had heard before but never tired of. Her timing was still impeccable. Her delivery still sharp. But about 15 minutes into the interview, something shifted. Johnny had just asked her about her legacy. What she wanted to be remembered for. Standard question. Safe territory. Lucille paused. Longer than she should have for comedic timing. Her expression changed. The performer's mask slipped slightly. You know, Johnny, she said, her voice quieter now. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. The studio went slightly quieter. Something in her tone. Johnny noticed. Leaned forward slightly. Oh? Yeah. Lucille looked down at her hands. Then back up at Johnny. When you get to be my age, you start thinking about what matters. What was real and what was just performance. Johnny nodded. Didn't interrupt. Just held space. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. Actually, he didn't stop mid-monologue. But in this moment, sitting across from Lucille Ball, Johnny Carson did something he rarely did. He abandoned his note cards completely. Set them aside. Turned his full attention to his guest. Not as a host. As a person. "What have you figured out?" he asked quietly. Lucille smiled. Sad. Knowing that the laughter matters. But the people matter more. I spent so many years chasing the next show, the next laugh, the next success. And I was good at it. Hell, I was great at it. But you know what I regret? What? Not telling the people I loved that I loved them. Not often enough. Not clearly enough. We assume they know. We assume there's time. And then there isn't. The audience was completely silent. This wasn't comedy anymore. This was something else. Ed McMahon, sitting at his usual spot, had stopped shuffling papers. Doc Severinsen had lowered his trumpet. Everyone was listening. Johnny's throat felt tight. "Lucy," she held up her hand. "Let me finish. I need to say this." She looked directly at Johnny. "You've been doing this show for 30 years. 30 years of making people laugh. Of being there for them. Of being consistent and reliable and excellent. And I know that it takes a toll. That you go home some nights wondering if it matters. If any of it matters." Johnny didn't confirm or deny. Just looked at her. "It matters, Johnny. You matter. Not Johnny Carson the performer. You. The person. The man who called me when I was alone. Who checked on me when I was sick. Who remembered my birthday when the rest of Hollywood forgot I existed. That's what matters. That's what lasts." Johnny's eyes were wet. He blinked rapidly, trying to hold it together. "Lucy, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because I'm 77 years old, and I don't have forever. And I need you to hear this. When this show ends, and it will end someday, don't make the mistake I made. Don't let the work become the only thing. Don't wait to tell people they matter. Don't assume there's time." Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny stood up. Walked around his desk. The producers in the control room were probably panicking. This wasn't protocol. Guests stayed in their chairs. Hosts stayed behind their desks. But Johnny didn't care. He walked to Lucille's chair. Extended his hand. She took it. He helped her stand. And then Johnny Carson, on live television, in front of millions of viewers, hugged Lucille Ball like he was afraid she might disappear. The hug lasted longer than television hugs usually do. 10 seconds. 15. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. They chose silence. Witnessing. The camera operators kept filming. Capturing something real. Something that transcended entertainment. When they finally separated, Johnny was openly crying. Not sobbing. Just tears running down his face. He didn't wipe them away. Didn't apologize. Just looked at Lucille. "Thank you," he said. His voice barely above a whisper, but the microphones caught it. "Thank you for everything. For paving the way. For being brilliant. For being my friend." Lucille cupped his face with her hand. A gesture so maternal, so intimate, that it felt almost intrusive to watch. "You're going to be okay, Johnny. You're going to figure out what matters. I can see it in you. You're tired of performing. Ready to be real. And that's okay. That's more than okay." She dropped her hand. Smiled. "Now help me back to my chair before I fall over. I'm too old to be standing this long." The audience laughed. Release tension. Johnny helped her sit. Returned to his desk. Wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Took a deep breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the camera, his voice rough. "Lucille Ball. The greatest there ever was." The audience exploded into applause. Standing ovation. Sustained. Lucille waved, blue kisses soaked it in. When the applause finally died down, Johnny looked at her one more time. "Will you come back? Soon?" Lucille's smile was gentle. Knowing. "We'll see, Johnny. We'll see." They both knew she wouldn't. This was goodbye. A final appearance. A final gift. The show went to commercial. During the break, Johnny sat at his desk, staring at nothing. Ed McMahon walked over. Put a hand on his shoulder. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. When they came back from commercial, Johnny had composed himself. Professional again. Smooth. He introduced the next segment. Made jokes. Kept the show moving. But everyone who'd been in the studio that night knew something had changed. Something fundamental. Lucille Ball had cracked something open in Johnny Carson. Had said out loud what he'd been feeling for years but couldn't articulate. Lucille Ball died exactly 1 week later. April 26, 1989. Heart failure. She was 77 years old. When Johnny got the news, he was at home. He sat in his study for 3 hours. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Just sat there, holding the weight of her final words. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny Carson didn't attend Lucille Ball's funeral. It surprised people. Disappointed some. But those who knew him understood. Johnny didn't do public grief well. Didn't perform mourning. Instead, he did something private. Something that nobody knew about until years later. He wrote a letter. To Lucille. Even though she was gone. Even though she'd never read it. He wrote it anyway. Thanked her. Told her she'd been right. That he was tired. That he'd been thinking about retirement. That her words had given him permission to think about life after The Tonight Show. That letter stayed in Johnny's desk drawer for the rest of his tenure. 3 more years. He'd become an institution. But he was done. Ready to stop performing. Ready to be real. In his final monologue, he didn't mention Lucille Ball by name. But those who'd been there that night in April 1989 knew. When Johnny said, "It's time to spend more time with the people who matter. To stop assuming there's always tomorrow." They knew where that wisdom came from. After The Tonight Show ended, Johnny Carson largely disappeared from public life. He didn't do interviews. Didn't make appearances. Didn't miss the spotlight. He spent time with his family. Pursued hobbies. Lived quietly. And according to those close to him, he was happier than he'd been in decades. Johnny Carson died in 2005. He was 79 years old. In his estate, among his personal effects, they found the letter. The one he'd written to Lucille Ball 16 years earlier. His family read it. Cried. Understood. At the bottom of the letter, in Johnny's handwriting, was a single sentence added years later. "You were right, Lucy. About all of it." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The clip of Lucille Ball's final appearance on The Tonight Show became legendary. Not for the comedy. For the honesty. For two legends being real with each other. For Lucille Ball using her final television appearance to give Johnny Carson, and everyone watching, permission to prioritize humanity over performance. Television historians study that episode. Use it in classes. Point to it as evidence that the best television isn't scripted. It's real. It's two people being vulnerable and honest and human in a medium that usually demands polish and perfection. Young hosts watch it and learn something Johnny Carson took 30 years to figure out, that the show will end. The cameras will turn off. But the connections you make, the kindness you show, the humanity you preserve, that lasts. Lucille Ball's final words to Johnny Carson weren't just advice. They were a gift. Permission to stop performing. Permission to be tired. Permission to choose life over legacy, and Johnny took it. Left at the top. Walked away. Lived quietly. Died peacefully. The letter he wrote her sits in a museum now. Behind glass. A reminder that even legends get scared. Even icons need permission to rest. And sometimes the greatest gift one artist can give another is simply this: it's okay to stop. You've done enough. You matter more than the work. That night in April 1989, Lucille Ball gave Johnny Carson his life back. And he spent the rest of it honoring her final gift, being real.